As Catherine says, I'm Director for Buses and Inclusion in DFT, which means I lead the buses teams, but also I'll work across the department on accessibility and inclusion, and also a bit of cross-cutting work to try and put people much more at the centre of what we do. I'm going to attempt to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the world of buses and try and cover three things. The importance of them to this government and the context that sits in, unpack a bit what that means for DFT's role, and then really attempt to draw out as I go through where I see some of the kind of potentially important roles for technology and for this sector in really helping us address some of those challenges. So I think my headline point is that buses really matter for this government. They play a part in every single one of the government's missions, and actually they're especially key to the growth mission, which is really driving the Treasury's thinking, and breaking down barriers to opportunity, as well, of course, as we've just been talking about, to climate change and to tackling air quality improvements as well. And that's why ministers have made growing bus use, and it's very carefully phrased, across the country, right across England, one of their top 5 priorities for DFT. And when you dive into the evidence, you can see some of the real difference that can make. ITS Leeds did a bit of work around this a few years ago, and they found improving bus connectivity leads to better outcomes for people, primarily by reducing social deprivation. But you get more people in employment, you get more people with higher incomes, and you get more people with better skills if you've got better bus services. And when you look at commuting times and reducing those by widening labour opportunities, again, improving bus services gets you more jobs. So for this government's agenda, it's really, really important. But the backdrop we're working with in the sector is really challenging. So for those of you who don't know, both this chart shows service levels in terms of miles of services on the left and passenger journeys on the right. And both, frankly, have been in pretty long-term decline. And you can track some of that back to as far as the 1950s and changes in car ownership levels. And this chart particularly shows it from 2006. And of course, some of these trends were exacerbated by the COVID pandemic and actually the subsequent changes we've seen in commuting, travel patterns and so on, particularly actually amongst concessionary passengers who have not come back to bus services in anything like the number that we had before COVID. Put that against the backdrop where we've got tighter local authority budgets of what they can put in from their own money into buses. We've got congestion growing, making services less reliable, less attractive, and we've got significant sector inflation as well as less revenue coming in. It's a really challenging environment. But it's not a massively uniform picture. I'm sure you all know this, but when you look across the country, you see huge variability in bus service usage. The darker places on this map are the places that have more use. And there are real pockets of hope in here for me. Places like Bristol, Southampton, Blackburn, Cornwall, Portsmouth, they've all grown bus use over the last 10 years when other parts of the country haven't. And in the last year or two, we've seen growth in places like Manchester following franchising here outside the window, and in more rural places like Norfolk as well. And generally, what's driving that is really getting the basics right and meeting people's needs. And that is where you get the growth from. And that ultimately is at the heart of what ministers have asked us to do in the department. They've really asked us to work with local authority and operators to grow usage by actually making buses better. And the two top things ministers want us to work hard on with everybody are improving punctuality and reliability and improving the connections. And it strikes me they are things where this sector has a heck of a lot to bring to what needs to be done. But then you go beyond that into integration, and we talked a lot about integration in this hall today, whether that's in ticketing, whether that's information, whether that's in data. Again, massive space for you to assist with. But also, there's space for your help too, in terms of delivering bus priority that really speeds up services in a way that works for all road users through really great traffic management, improving safety environments and perception of safety environments. There's technology and data running all the way through this list. And what's changed too is the way that DFT is engaging with this. So The Minister's asked us to change what we do quite a bit, and there are kind of 4 elements to what we're up to. The first is, I think, resonating with a lot of the theme I've heard today about supporting and working with authorities. So getting out of a world where we in DFT ask people to submit plans and we mark their homework, into a world where we're standing alongside the sector, working with local authorities in partnership. Reforming and devolving funding, and that's about providing certainty. It's about allocating money by formula based on need so that people have got the confidence to invest and to build the skills in their authority teams that they need. It's also then about transparency. I think this is an interesting change for us, that we are working to make sure that there is very clear outcome and output data, and it's going to take us a little while to get there, about both what is being achieved in each local authority area, but also about some of the choices that are being made about how authorities and mayors are going about doing that, so that we can really learn from the places that are doing it well, but also understand those choices and have some local accountability and transparency. And then we are making some changes to legislation, which are not going to drive change by themselves, but are potentially quite important in enabling it. I thought I'd just touch on those for a minute because the Bus Services Bill is live in Parliament at the moment. We've already made one change through secondary legislation, which is to give every single local transport authority in England the power to franchise their buses. That now exists. That came in December. And obviously Manchester and Greater Manchester have led the way in that. And we're using the bill to really sort of shore that up and to make some more improvements learning from what's happened here. But we're also using it to strengthen local authority powers in a number of other areas around things like antisocial behaviour, how they fund their bus networks, as well as setting some new expectations about how they manage changes with operators to networks, about accessibility, and coming back to the decarbonisation theme, about zero-emission buses, where the bill effectively gives us the power to set a date by which the diesel bus used for registered services could last have been bought and registered. Not quite an end sales date, but remarkably similar. I think in this landscape of change, I think importantly for some people in this audience, I think demand-responsive transport has got a potentially quite a key role to play. Going back to that early slide about connectivity, I'm really interested in whether the evidence shows that DRT can drive some of those benefits in the same way as a traditional service. I suspect it can, because it's about the connectivity to the opportunity. I think as many of you will probably know, we're working with 16 local transport authorities to pilot these schemes through the Rural Mobility Fund. And the whole point and aim of this is to try lots of different stuff and then to share best practice on how to deliver schemes in a way that's most likely to work in different contexts, but also for you as a sector who are involved in it to tell us what we need to change around regulations, around the law, to allow stuff to work in the way that you want it to work. They're at very different stages. 4 or 5 of them have finished. I'm delighted, actually, that the authorities are continuing those schemes in some form in all of those places after the pilots, particularly in places like Gloucestershire and Surrey. But there are 2 yet to start as well, which just shows that diversity in the local authority landscape. And we're already learning quite a lot from them. We're learning that there are some real choices about aggregation which can have big impacts on subsidy levels. We're learning just how important it is to go into this knowing what you want to achieve from a scheme, what the needs of your area, who the people who are going to use it are. We're learning out some of the trade-offs in the size of different zones within a scheme and how that balances sort of demand and availability. I think a really key lesson is just how important it is to market these things effectively and to really make sure users know about them and how to use them. I've talked a bit about bus franchising. I think that's quite a big change. It's going to mean that local authorities, either directly or indirectly, are much, much more involved in planning bus networks and wanting the best connectivity they can get. But I think it's also a big opportunity for DRT. Most people think about bus franchising as being like London, or indeed Greater Manchester, with the local authority tightly specifying it, all buses looking the same. But there are many, many more models than that. You could have much more commercially led and driven franchises where the operator does more of the planning. And it's much more driven by connectivity levels and choices about what kind of service you provide. You can have models that grow out of your franchise network or your tendered network today to become a franchise and draw on the commercial network. So one of the things we're going to do in DFT is try and work up some more different models in partnership with some LTAs over the course of the next year or so. And we're really interested in people's ideas. And I think, again, data, some of the opportunities for connectivity, some of the advancements potentially in planning of networks that could come from a much more data-driven approach have got a lot to bring to that party. I think we're really keen to see DRT play its full role there and to work with ITS UK colleagues in doing so. So it's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and I just thought I'd try and leave you with some thoughts, just trying to draw out where some of the opportunities for this sector might be in the world of bus. We talked quite a bit today about the Integrated National Transport Strategy. I'm lucky enough to be on the sort of internal steering group for that within the department, and it's really challenging to make this happen in practice, and we need your thoughts, we need your ideas. I know a lot of you will have responded to the consultation and given us that input. I know more of you will be involved in the regional roadshows. But what it's really about, it's about effectiveness, it's about efficiency, it's about driving growth, it's about driving opportunity. And I think as my colleague Sam Rose said this morning, data feels like it's an absolutely key enabler to that. And transforming the way we do stuff, the way we plan on a cross-modal basis, is absolutely key to success here. And I don't think we can do that without you. And buses are a major part of that, because the public transport in most parts of England starts from buses. There are 2 or 3 times as many journeys as there are by rail, so it's a really key part of the story. And for me, I think as I've hinted already, a really key element is thinking hard about whether we have got the quality of connectivity and journey planning that we need. I was at an event last night where somebody was talking about the new connectivity tool that we're developing in DFT being really helpful. That's great, and it's come a long way, and it brings a lot together. But I said there's lots more opportunity to do more in partnership with you to give local authorities even better tools than that, and indeed operators too, moving forward. I think there are real opportunities in the space of bus priority in terms of how do we get much more intelligent, even than we've got today, traffic management systems that really allow us to drive those data sources. Sam was talking about earlier on about the bus that waits for the train, and that's absolutely right. But what about where there are multiple trains on that journey, or multiple buses it needs to connect with? Wouldn't it be great if we had a system that was clever enough to tell the driver whether that bus should stop at that station or not to maximise the benefit for those passengers? And that can't be impossible with the data and the tech opportunities we have. And then we touched in the last session briefly on ticketing. We are working with Midlands Connect, with West Midlands, with bus operators on the broker solution. We're rolling out pay-as-you-go pilots in Manchester on the rail network, and indeed in West Midlands as well. Real opportunities there. And I'm going to come back to DRT again, because I think some of those lessons there for me, there's real potential as sort of generational AI develops to really move forward again, and many of you in this room will be far, far more expert on all of this than I am, but around how do we drive booking even more effectively, how do we drive aggregation more effectively, and how do we drive some of those real efficiencies in DRT that makes it an even more attractive option. But perhaps most importantly of all, the thing I get from going to events like this, and I'd really value still, is to keep the conversation flowing. Your practical experiences, the bits of the law, the things we do in DFT, the things that we can help change that get in the way of delivering an integrated system so it really works for people is what I think will add the most value overall. And I'm kind of really looking forward to working with all of you, continuing to work with you and ITS UK to achieve that. So thank you.
Okay, so there's an invitation from Stephen there. Anyone want to ask any questions? Oh, I think, and then one there.
Hi there, Matthew Kendrick from Theoremus. I was curious about one of the graphs you showed on the dip in bus patronage. It looked like there had been no impact to the London bus patronage. Do you know what the reason behind that was? Had there been sort of any research into why everything had a sharp decline apart from London?
We haven't got a detailed answer to it, but we've certainly seen patronage rebound a bit more in London than we have done elsewhere. We think it might partly be to do with sort of mix of tourist travel, possibly the arrangements around home to school transport in London, where there's a lot more free travel for children available than there is elsewhere. I think one of the trends we see in other parts of the country is perhaps as some parents are home working more, perhaps quite a few of the educational journeys might have dropped off too, and that's not happening to quite the same extent in London. Probably something underlying about car ownership levels going on as well.
Thank you.
Stephen, David Redwell, South West England. 2 points that we'd like to make from our region. You've probably heard from our MT and from our unions, some of the MPs, that we've had a number of bus fires in the region. We don't seem to have a standard and safety board for buses. We have for rail, we have for light rail. It seems to be the bus companies investigate their own fires, and the standards for material inside the buses is much lower than they are in train carriages. And I think it's something that the department needs to look at. And our second issue, I'm going to plead this again. The bill is light on coaches, and yet where Brian and myself are, we're losing more National Express coach routes, or Megabus is gone, but yet they're a vital part of the integrated transport system. You've probably heard about the 503. You must have heard about that one. It goes from Penzance up through Launceston and Oakhampton. We really want some economic regulation around coaches. This is coming from Peninsular and Gateway Transport Boards. We're trying to do a lot of work on coach, but we can't make it work in the... I'm on the coach forum. We can't make it work without some form of public subsidy and some economic regulation. We're not saying you regulate every National Express or every Flixbus that goes up motorways, but once they come off those motorways, we need some help to get them around Dorset, Somerset, Wiltshire, Gloucestershire, and up through Wiltshire and across the sub-region. I'm sure it'd be good if the rest of the STBs do some more work on coaches. And we're pushing for Newcastle coach station to be reopened by the council up there. Thanks.
Thanks. On the coach point, I think I'm with you in coaches being one of the most underused modes and undervalued modes of transport there is. And that is absolutely one of the questions we are thinking about with our colleagues as part of the Integrated National Transport Strategy. Is there more DFT could or should be doing in the coach space? I think it's a point really well made. Similarly, on the vehicle fires perspective, it's something we're watching and trying to understand quite closely. And we're working with our colleagues who kind of in the wider road regulation sector, so colleagues such as the Vehicle Certification Agency, who are actually responsible for the vehicle certification, colleagues on the safety side of things for road more widely around some of those issues. So we're watching this space and watching it quite carefully and reflecting a bit on whether anything further is needed.
Thank you. Time for one more question, I think. Thank you.
Is that working? Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, my question is about coaches as well. Ray Chapman, Transmountain Metro and Kent Sussex Connect. Do you actually measure how many passengers use the coach network? So your Flix buses, your National Expresses, mega buses, and that short haul green line like your London to Luton Airport and your more longer distance, as the chap at the back raised?
It's a great question. My understanding is that all the kind of registered services are captured in our data, and I think we do have kind of coach data at a high level. But I think it's fair to say overall our data sets around coach are nowhere near the quality of our data sets for most other transport modes, and I think that's part of frankly, the fundamental questions we have about where coach fits in. And I think all these points around coaches are brilliantly made because there's a real opportunity there, it seems to me, whether that is about government enabling rather than necessarily government funding and supporting, but actually there is a mode that can do a great deal quite quickly and with real potential. So it's certainly something we want to think about.